names, and you remember the formatting from before, right? We had the formatting when we looked at hunter.io, and we said, okay, first initial last name. Well, I might take a first initial last name here, and I'll add that to my list. Now, we could utilize scrapers out there to look through the employee list and pull down all the names and then transfer those names into first initial last name. You could write a script to do that with Python if you want to challenge yourself to do that. I guarantee you there are tools out there to do this. But this is the kind of information that we're after. We're after what kind of credentials can we gather? And this loops all back. This is the wheel spinning here, right? You want email addresses. When we're talking network and we're talking what you're going to be doing with these kind of assessments, you want these email addresses. You want anything that's been a part of a breach credential leak, right? And you just want as much information on the employees as you can gather. When you take all these email addresses, and it says 34,000 employees. When you take 34,000 employees, I would almost bet money on it that one of these employees has a password of something like fall 2019 or winter 2019 exclamation, or something like Tesla 1234 exclamation. People are always the weakest point of an organization, and people will be lazy with their passwords unless you absolutely force them to use long passwords. I do not know Tesla's password policy, but I get in almost every external assessment with a weak password like fall 2019 or winter 2019. So I want you to think about these things. We're not going to go too depth into social media, but have that in your wheelhouse as well. We're just trying to utilize as much resources that are out there in order to use them for our advantage. So there's a lot of tools that I've shown you, and I've given you a lot of the basics, and really that's all you need for information gathering. Google is your best friend. Utilize Google to your full advantage. Utilize social media. People post things all the time that they shouldn't be posting, and just dig deep. Information gathering is one of the most important steps along with scanning and enumeration. Keep repeating that to yourself and you'll be very, very successful as a penetration tester. So that is it for this section. I kind of just wanted to give a brief overview of this and then give you some ideas to get your wheels spinning and really think about it. Again, we're harping on breach credentials mainly. So from here, we're going to move into scanning and enumeration. We're going to start doing our hacking, getting into the real weeds of hacking. And I'm very, very excited about that. And you're going to see some of the stuff that you've seen before when it comes to reconnaissance pop back up. So I'm excited to see this play out through the course and how we're going to utilize it. So that's it for this section. I look forward to seeing you in the scanning and enumeration section. So I will catch you over there.
Welcome to the scanning and enumeration section of this course. It is actually now 2021 when we're recording this, and we're doing some light updating on how we go about starting off this lab in this section. So we're going to be using a vulnerable machine called Kioptrix. If you go to Google, you can type in Kioptrix and find it fairly easy. So you go to Kioptrix like this, Kioptrix. And we're going to be using level 1. I'm showing you the source of where it's coming from, but we're actually going to provide this VM just to avoid any sort of confusion. So Kioptrix level 1 here comes from a website called VulnHub. Let me make this a little bit bigger. So you see VulnHub here. VulnHub is a great website and great resource once you kind of get into hacking and learning about this, where you could come to VulnHub and just download a vulnerable machine, run it on VMware or VirtualBox or however you want, and try to attack it. And you can see they have difficulty easy, intermediate. You can come through here and just have fun playing with vulnerable machines. And that's all Kioptrix is. It's a beginner level vulnerable machine that you can download, install, and run. Now, the download and the install, you can see this is from 2010. Some of the stuff was broken, sometimes a little bit difficult to get running in the original lab. So we're just modifying this a bit to make it easier. What we've done on our end is just hosted a file that will work, should by default install and run. So if you go to your browser and you just go to tcm-sec.com like this, and you type in /Kioptrix, Kioptrix, pause for a second, make sure you see this, and then you just hit enter. You'll be brought to a Google Drive. Okay, and this Google Drive here should say Kioptrix. You should have an OVF and an OVA file. All you need here is the OVA, and all you'll have to do is just hit download right here, get the download going. I believe this is around 250 megabytes, so it might take a minute. Go ahead, download it, pause, and then come back when you're ready to continue. Okay, so moving on, I'm going to show you how to install this on VMware and on VirtualBox. These are the only two supported methods that we're going to utilize in the course. If you're going and you're using something like VMware Horizon, or you're using a different type of virtualization software, that's fine, but we can't support it if you run into any issues. So we strongly recommend using VMware. If you're using VirtualBox, that's fine as well. But we're going to be doing most of the course in VMware, though it should not matter too much. So here is VMware. I'm going to show you first how to install it here, and then we're going to go ahead and do the same thing in VirtualBox. So all we're going to do is we're going to go to player up here, or we can go to home actually, and we can just say open a virtual machine, and then just go ahead and navigate to the area where you downloaded it. Okay, so here's my file, Kioptrix level 1. I'm going to say open. I'm going to go ahead and just save this here. So I'm going to say, this is where do you want to save your storage path? I'm saving it here. Call it Kioptrix level 1, import. The defaults are fine. You might get an error right here. That's okay too. Just hit retry and it should work fine. It's going to take a second to import. While we're waiting, I'm going to go ahead and also do the same thing with VirtualBox. So I'm going to get VirtualBox going. And what we'll do here is a similar process. So we'll go to import, and then we'll just select the area for our file. Okay, and mine again is just sitting here on this drive, Kioptrix level 1.ova. I'll hit next. And then it's going to ask me some questions here. We're just going to hit next on this. We'll go ahead and set these up in a second. So I'm just going to say import, and that'll be fine. All right, so looking at the settings for both of these machines, I'm going to go ahead and drag this over. Here, we can just right click and go to settings. Same thing here, you can right click and go to settings, and we're going to set these up the same. So either way, on 512 megabytes, this is fine. Honestly, if you wanted to kick this down to 256, you could. I would not recommend going any lower than 256, though. Oops, I did not mean to exit that. Though I will say that if you have, I wouldn't go lower than 256. We're just going to be running this in the background. But you don't need to go higher either. So 256 I think is fine. If you want to give it 512, that's fine too, depending on the amount of RAM that you have on your actual machine. So 256 is good. And then here in the network adapter, we're going to switch to NAT. Okay, so make sure you're good there and just hit OK. And that should be it. Same thing here. So if you want to switch the storage, you can, or the amount of RAM allocated, you can. Only big thing here is just going into the network, and you can see that it says NAT network, and that's exactly what we want. Okay, so this box is set up just fine. And then all you have to do on these is just hit play. Okay, all you got to do is power it on. You could just say start here, and I could just hit play here, and both will start. All we're gonna do is just let this run. So that's all you want to do at this point. You're just gonna let it run. You can see I've got both machines booting. You will come to a login screen, and that's when you know that this is ready. Okay, so when you're at the login screen, it'll say, hey, Kioptrix, blah, blah, blah. And then we're going to take it from there, and we're going to figure out how we can get into this machine. Okay, so if you get a screen like this, you can just say do nothing and just let this keep booting. But other than that, once this runs to a login, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next video. So you see this, once you're at the login screen, you are good to go. All right, and that is it. So I will catch you over in the next video as we walk through how to find this machine, and then we're going to start scanning it and attacking it and hopefully rooting it. So I'll catch you over in the next video. Hello everybody, and welcome to this section on Nmap. I'm actually recording this in 2020, so the video you're going to see here shortly is from 2019. We've had a little bit of issues with the command that I show, which is netdiscover, on how to find your IP address of the Kioptrix machine to actually begin scanning this machine. So I'm going to show you a couple of alternatives, and then I'm going to let the video play as it was before, and you'll have several options on how to find your Kioptrix machine and hopefully find the IP address. So at this Kioptrix login page, we can cheat just a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give you a login here, and just go ahead and type John as the login, and I'm going to show you the password before I delete it. The password is going to be 2cows2, just like that. TWOCOWS 2 with the T and a C capitalized. So go ahead and type in John and then 2cows2. And you can see we are now logged in as John at Kioptrix. Now, this machine is very, very old, so the typical ifconfig or IPA or any of those do not work on this machine. However, we can do a quick ping, for example, to anything we want. We could say 8.8.8.8. It could be an internal IP address. It doesn't even have to be an IP address that resolves. But we could say ping, and as we ping, I'm going to hit Control C here. You can see that we see ping from 192.168.4.53. That's my IP address. Now, the IP address you're going to see here in the video shortly is going to change. However, as of right now, the IP address I'm seeing for Kioptrix is 4.53. Now, we also use NetDiscover, but there's actually a cool tool we can utilize as well. Now, if we come into the network, you can see that I have an IP address of 192.168.4.51 for myself. Now, there is a tool built into Kali Linux that is called ARP-Scan, and you could do a syntax of a -L with that. Hit enter, and it's going to pull off an ARP-Scan as well, which is what NetDiscover is doing. What we need to be looking for, and you can see this is kind of my home network, what we need to be looking for is VMware. You can see VMware is sitting here at 192.168.4.53. The only one to be on the lookout for is possibly yourself, which we're at 51. I don't see in this list, it didn't pick us up. So I could see 192.168.4.53. VMware should be the only one that's running, or if you're using VirtualBox or something like that, it should show up here. So kind of identify it either this way, or you can come in and identify it through the Kioptrix login itself. Of course, you can use NetDiscover as shown in the video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and go into the video on scanning with Nmap.
Okay, so now we have Kioptrix up and running. We need to determine where it actually is, and then we can do a little bit of scanning. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up into our applications and open our terminal. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. And we're going to run a tool called NetDiscover. So before we can do that, we need to type in ifconfig and identify your IP address. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this first 3 octets here. And we're going to run NetDiscover. So NetDiscover is going to look like this. We're going to say NetDiscover. We're going to do a -R for range. We're going to paste in this and do a .0/24. So what are we doing? We are going to be using ARP to detect all the machines on the network. So you should be familiar with ARP from the Linux lessons and from the networking lessons. So we're going to attempt to use ARP to address anything on the network, and we're sweeping the entire subnet of /24. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And in a second here, our machine should start popping up, and it does. So remember, our host was at 139. This host here at 134 is likely our culprit. So you should only have 2 machines in network because we're only running 2. You can ignore .1, .2, and .254. We are only focusing on the one that looks similar to ours, which is 192.168.57.134. So now we know our machine address. We can start attacking it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control C, which is going to kill this session here. And I'm going to hit Control L to clear my screen. All right, so I'm going to open up a notepad and we'll just store this away for a rainy day. We need to first talk about what we're going to be doing here. So remember before when we ran our TCP three-way handshake, we had something like SYN, SYN-ACK, and ACK, right? And we can just say SYN-ACK kind of like this to combine it. So we've got 3 parts. We've got the part where we reach out to a port and we say, hey port, are you open? And the port says, yeah, I'm open. Let's go ahead and make that connection. And then we go ahead and connect to it. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using a tool called Nmap. And Nmap stands for Network Mapper. Now what Network Mapper is going to go out and do is it's going to scan for open ports and services. Now this scanning is going to take place and it's going to identify these open ports with something similar to this three-way handshake. So we're just going to modify it a little bit. Now what the process that we're doing is called stealth scanning, and it used to be written out like this. Now it's just done by default, and we'll get to the switches here in a second. Don't worry about that. Just we're going to be running stealth scanning. And now this stealth scanning used to be stealthy, right? That's why they called it stealth scanning, because it used to be undetectable. Nowadays, very detectable. If you run Nmap in a network that has good security, you're going to get picked up. Although, being a pen tester, I would say Nmap probably doesn't get picked up in 80% of the assessments that I run. So don't expect clients to be running good security, but just know that even though it says stealth, it's not stealthy at all. So the stealth scanning, why was it stealthy? Why was it called this? Well, if we go back to the three-way handshake, what the stealth scan does is it does the SYN. It says, hey, I want to connect to you. And the open port, if it's open, will say, yeah, I want to make that connection back with you, friend. And what's going to happen is we're just going to say, you know what? I'm just kidding. I'm going to send over this reset flag. So this RST. Why? Well, that means we don't actually establish a connection. So like when you go out to a website and you go to Google and Google loads, well, guess what? You establish that connection. You establish that three-way handshake. What we're doing is we're going out and we're saying, hey, I want to establish connection. The port reveals to us that, yes, I am open for connection. And then we're going to say, just kidding, let's not make that connection. Because we never established that connection, then it was technically stealthy. So that's what we're going out and we're doing. We're never making connections to these ports, but this is how we're identifying them as open. So we're going to use a tool, and we're going to use a tool like this. We're going to say Nmap, and we're going to say something along the lines of -T4 -P -A. Now, you have no idea what this means, and I don't expect you to, but I'm going to walk you through these. And what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, Nmap, I have a choice in speed, and that choice in speed can be between a 1 and a 5. 1's really slow, and 5's really fast. Now, the default for me has always been 4. Now, I'm teaching you my preference. It's always been 4, okay? And we utilize this, and I think 5. 5's okay, but 5's kind of fast. Maybe you're going to miss something. Maybe it gets caught. The slower, the better in terms of detection, but in the instance that we're going to be running it through this course, we're going to use 4. Anytime you do like a Vuln Hub or something like a Hack the Box, which you're going to see here in a few videos, you're going to run T4 just because you're not worried about this detection, you're not worried about anything. So T4 is a speed purpose. Now, -P-. Well, this stands for I want to scan all ports. Okay, we could say something like -P, or we could just have -P left off completely. Now, if we leave off -P completely, it's going to scan what are known as the top 1,000 ports. The top 1,000 ports are your most common ports. So think of like port 80, port 443, 139, 445. All the ports that we covered in the networking section going to show up again here. But there are 65,535 ports out there. We want to scan every single one of those, because what if, for example, there is a service running on port 47,700? Well, that's not a common top 1,000 port. If we don't scan all ports, then we're going to miss that port. And that could be something incredibly valuable to us, right? So I always scan like this, -P-. You can also do things like scan specific ports. You could say like 443, or say you wanted to scan just for web servers. You could do 8443, something like that. Or you can mix in, say you want to scan for DNS as well. You can add in 53, etc. You can scan for specifics, and we're going to get into that in a little bit of a later video on why we might do it this way. But for now, for the beginner lesson, -P-, we're going to scan everything. And lastly, we've got this -A in here. So -A stands for everything. I want to scan all of it. I want you to tell me the version information, the operating system information, anything you can tell me, fingerprinting, etc. Now, this may all be confusing. It's going to make a lot more sense when you see a scan. I'm going to go ahead and open up a new tab. And what I want you to do, let's go ahead and I'm going to blow this up for us. And what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and start running the scan while we wait. So go ahead and copy this here. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to put in our IP address, and that's how it knows what to scan. We're just going to hit enter on that. And now we're scanning. So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to take this, and I want to run mmap again with the -- help. And I want to talk through some of these settings in here so that you understand fully what we're doing. Now, -- help is always great, as I said before. Man pages are good as well. But let's talk about some things here. So we've got this host discovery section, which we're really not going to use in this course, but this is good for, say, -n. Say you want to do a ping sweep of the network. Well, you can do a ping scan, right? Where you just sweep an entire subnet, a /24, for example, and see what's up. Very quick. A -pn, maybe the host isn't acting like it's online, but you know it's there for sure. You can say -pn, and you can say, hey, I want to leave all the hosts, or treat all the hosts as if they're online, even if they're not responding to my ping request or anything. So make yourself familiar with this kind of stuff. This is interesting, and we'll cover a lot of this as we go in the course, but just for the first walkthrough while we're scanning, I think this is super important. Now, scan techniques. This -ss, this comes back into play. TCP SYN is what it's called, but it's also known as the stealth scan. There's all these other types of scans. You're not going to need them. There's only maybe one scan out of all these that may be useful, but you're not going to need them through this course, and you'll probably never use anything but the SS and the SU 99% of the time. So for the scope of this course, that's what we're going to focus on. Now, the SS, we talked about connection-oriented protocols. We talked about TCP. Well, guess what? There's also UDP, and there's 65,535 ports over there as well that we have to scan. Now, UDP is a connection-less protocol. So what we're going to do when we scan it, let's go back to this scan. What we're going to do when we scan it is we're going to actually do that SU in here, and I'll copy this syntax and just move it over so it looks a little cleaner. We're going to say something like, we could put it anywhere we want. The order doesn't matter, but we can say something like -SU to scan for UDP. And the one little change that I make here, two changes actually. I take off the -A and I do a -P-. Why do I do a -P, I should say. Why do I do this? I do this because UDP takes forever to scan, absolutely forever to scan. Because it is a connectionless protocol, it does not have that instant response time. So when we scan UDP, typically we scan the top 1,000. That is my recommendation to you, or else you will be sitting here waiting for hours upon hours for a scan to finish. See, now our scan over here is already finished. If I were to run this UDP with the same thing, it will take forever. Going back into this before we get into the scan. You can see here that we can specify -P of port. That's going to be very common for us, but here's where I really want to get into. We're doing a -SV, a -SC, a -O here, all with the -A, okay? So we're probing open ports for service information. We could say -SV, and we could say -SC, or we could pick these, one or the other, or a mixture of some of these. But we can also do script scanning, which we'll get into script scanning here in a little bit as well. But we can do OS detection, where it goes out and it tries to define an operating system, and you're going to see all this with our scan. But when we use -A, it does it all for us. So why not use -A? So you can see it does OS detection, version detection, script scanning, and traceroute. Now, there's one caveat to -A, and we're going to talk about this in another video in a thought process. It is much faster to remove the -A and scan a -P-. Typically, that'll come back much, much, much faster. Then what you can do is you can define the open ports. So say there's port 22, port 80. Okay, just go through this. You can specify those ports specifically. You could say -P like we did in the example earlier with 80 and 443, and then do a -A on those. Now that will just scan only these specific ports with all. Instead of going out to every single port and attempting to do all on every single port, It's just a little bit faster. Now, if your wheels are spinning and you're thinking about it, maybe even you can script this, right? You can script something to say, hey, Nmap, I want to take these ports from a basic scan, anything that you pull back, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run a new scan on it with the -A, only specifying the ports that we found. That gets your wheels spinning. This is where scripting becomes important. If you want an improvement on speed, for me personally, I've never ever done that. I don't think, for me personally, that it's made much of a difference. I just let my scans run as they run, and I work on other things while scans are running. There's plenty of time to do other things while you're doing your scanning. So, and typically, another thing to note is typically we're doing scanning when we're doing our OSINT as well. So if we start up a client assessment, one of the first things I'm going to do is probably kick off a NESA scan or an Nmap scan. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to go look for those breach credentials, or I'm going to look for that juicy information on Google or social media or where I can find it, and utilize that time while this is scanning, or else I'll just be sitting on my hands doing nothing while these wait. So we're going to take this information now and we're going to start reviewing it. So we have here our scan results, and you can see the scan results come back, and the first thing we notice are open ports. That's what we want to look at. We want to look at these open ports, and we want to look at what's running on these open ports. So we see here that what's running on port 22 is SSH. Okay, on top of that, it's got a version here for us. So OpenSSH 2.9 P2. And then we see Apache is running on port 80. We've also got Apache running on port 443. And we've got this RPC bind in 139. Now remember from the networking lesson, these kind of always play together. So we've got SMB open, basically Samba shares. And what we can do is, first step is usually enumeration. Once we see this, we take the scan in, we scroll down a little bit as well, and we can look at some things and see, okay, there's no OS information. It found Linux here, 2.4.x, and it's most likely pulling that down from the Apache. It's probably a best guess because it's running Red Hat, that it's running Linux, and taking a stab at it here, or it may have actually determined that from sort of header or some other location. A lot of times, this isn't so sure as it's saying it is here. A lot of times it'll give you a percentage. So the OS is not always definitive as it is here. So we've got the OS, which could be useful for us later when we do enumeration, and you'll see how that comes into play. What I want you to take in right now is that so far we've got a scan result back, and that scan has gone out and it has looked for open ports doing that modified stealth handshake. So it says SYNAC reset, RST. Doing that, it's found a few open ports. Now, it is our job to look up the information that we are seeing on these open ports and try to find exploits on them. So that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to cover in the next video, we're going to go kind of step by step, and I'll talk through the methodology and why I attack certain ports first, what ports those are, how we can enumerate those ports, and then we'll enumerate everything, get all the details down. Once we have all the details down, we're going to move into the section of exploitation. It's going to get really fun, and we'll exploit this machine in multiple ways. So from here, just take apart or take that away from the lesson that you've officially successfully scanned this machine. I encourage you to maybe go back and take notes, or to go back and scan it again. Get the syntax down in your head. Keep typing this out. Remember it. This is the one thing you're probably going to type out more than anything else. And then also go through and look at the different types of options you have there. If there's one that interests you, just run it against the machine. Play around with it. This is your lab time. Make the most of it. So for now, that's it. In the next video, we're going to start enumerating these ports. So I will catch you over in the next video. Let's talk about the scan before we dive into any enumeration. So the scan here, we've got these open ports. We've got 22 with SSH, and we've got 80 and 443, which are hosting websites. And then we've got 139, which has got a file share with Samba on it. And then you've got the 111 and 32.768, which are RPC and related to the SMB. So we need to think about point of attack as an attacker. Now, when I see this scan, I light up with 80 and 443, and I light up with 139, and sometimes you'll see 445 with it as well. I light up from those because those are commonly found with exploits. If we think back about all of the exploits that have been out there for a website, for example, or if we think to Samba or SMB related exploits, just recently, right now it's recording in 2019. In 2017, there was malware that went around called WannaCry, and that was based off of something called Eternal Blue, also known as MS17010. It was a pretty wicked exploit that utilized a flaw in SMB. SMB has been historically bad, and websites have been historically bad. Now, when we see something like port 22 is SSH, and historically, it hasn't really been that bad. Now, we can try attacks against it like brute force attacks, or we can try something like default credentials or root Tor on it, for example. But when we look at it, we can maybe enumerate the version, but there's not usually what we call remote code execution on SSH. Remote